Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story. I couldn't get it out, could I? This is the construction edition, actually. That's what we're going to be talking about, is construction for some reason. The Bible presents so many scenarios, and so today's one of those scenarios of something. It's just about Solomon building his palace. It doesn't seem spiritual on the surface. Mm-hmm. There's a reason it's in Scripture. Some of that may be historical. Some of it may be so that we can reference some other things that are going to come later, so we can understand some things, But so we're going to hear about Solomon, or read about Solomon building a palace for himself. So it says, beginning in verse 1 of chapter 7, Solomon also built a palace for himself, and it took him 13 years to complete the construction. One of Solomon's buildings was called the Palace of the Forest of Lebanon. It was 150 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. There were 4 rows of cedar pillars, and great cedar beams rested on the pillars. The hall had a cedar roof. Above the beams of the pillars were 45 side rooms arranged in 3 tiers of 15 each. On each end of the long hall were 3 rows of windows facing each other. All the doorways and doorposts had rectangular door frames and were arranged in sets of 3 facing each other. Solomon also built the hall of pillars, which is 75 feet long and 45 feet wide. There was a porch in front, along with a canopy supported by pillars. So this is a lot of detail that the only thing you can go is, man, that is big. But the first verse is where I kind of want to start out. It said, Solomon also built a palace for himself. So what it means by that is he built the temple first, which took 7 years to build. Then he builds a palace for himself that took 13 years to build. 13, that's a long time. Mm-hmm. Jay, you have the most experience in this room with construction, and you've had probably some that drug on a little longer than you expected. Mm-hmm. But have you ever had one that lasted longer than a year?
I've never had one to last a year.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, 7 months.
Okay, 7 months is the max.
Yeah, start to move in on a project.
And if you don't mind sharing, how many houses have you built?
I'd rather not.
Okay.
No, I don't care. Several. I'm just
Several. Okay, that's fine.
You know what? You get tied down.
Don't bog you down into details. Yeah, like they are here. A 13-year building project.
Oh, I can't imagine.
Would be horrendous. You feel like we're in the process now at your campus of trying to build a new building. We don't have anything on site yet, but the process is, the ball's rolling, and it already feels like it's eternal, don't it?
Yeah, it sure does. It feels like it's been 13 years sometimes to get here.
There's a lot of stress that goes along with that, right? Pastors, the resignation rate of pastors after a building project is really, really high, surprisingly high. Anyway, does this seem out of order to you, that he spent twice as long on a place for himself as he did for the Lord? Does it tell you anything about Solomon's priorities, or is it just the nature of the beast?
Solomon was really wise when it came to ruling, and a lot of things he was not so wise when it came to him dealing with himself, I guess. Right. I mean, if we think about it, that he had 1,000 families to take care of. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of people that were relying on him.
You need a big house.
You need a big house with lots of rooms. So, yeah, I think it's supposed to, give us a little bit of pause, because right before, in the end of chapter 6, it says, it took 7 years to build a temple. It took 13 years to build all of his things. So I think it's supposed to be wow, that's...
He's slightly self-absorbed.
Yeah.
I do think, when you read Ecclesiastes, you see how self-absorbed he was. That he was wise. Mm-hmm. But, if you believe that you need 1,000 women, you're relatively self-absorbed. That's how I would...
From the sister wives TVs on shows like 3 is kind of the max.
That's
Once they added the 4th wife and
get-
sister wives, it all went downhill.
messes up. Well, he was in a lot of trouble.
I'll keep that in mind. Jay, what about you? You think is
How many wives do you think are appropriate?
One. Well, it's a couple ways to look at this. You could look at it and say, well, he did have his priorities right because he built the temple 1st. You know, he spent his time, effort, resources, and energy, and then afterwards, because he was, let's say, so blessed. I'm not sure the multitude of families is necessary. Blessed. I think that's one of those things that he probably wasn't so wise on. It does seem somewhat elaborate and extravagant to even think that a building project for a residence, palace, call it whatever you want to, could and would last 13 years. Because it's not like he ran out of money and had to wait. He wasn't waiting for interest rates to come down. He had an abundance of resources to make this project happen. He had thousands of people at his disposal to work on the project. So we're talking about something opulent, extravagant, and 13 years.
yeah,
of process.
the only observation I would make in his favor would be that, at least for the temple, his father had collected most of the materials that were needed to build it. The gold, the wood. It was already on site. All he had to do was follow through with it, which could have. I mean, we know what supply chain issues are right now, so it could have slowed things down. So we get the description. Verse 7 says, Solomon also built the throne room known as the Hall of Justice, where he sat to hear legal matters. It was paneled with cedar from floor to ceiling. The only reason this caught my attention, so if you go in many local small courtrooms, you may not get this flavor, even though I'm pretty sure the local courtroom where we live does have wood paneled walls around the judge's area and side. But I've been in a couple of federal courthouses, and almost all of them, I don't think it's cedar, I think it's another high-end wood, but the ceilings are wood, the walls are wood. It's very, very elaborate, which says that for thousands of years, this is the first hall of justice that we find. So a courtroom becomes a prominent feature, and the way it's designed, still today they're building federal courthouses to look very similar to this, the wood paneled. What it caused me to pause and think was, this is thousands of years ago, and still today in modern architecture, this is a pattern. Can you think of some other things that for thousands of years have had influence on us today? And how are we influenced by ancient cultures that we don't even pay any attention to, the things that we do?
One of the obvious things for me is not just the buildings, but you go all the way back to the Ten Commandments, which have influenced our culture in particular a lot. As far as it relates to the building, it's called here Hall of Justice, where I would say pretty much you could connect most of our laws and regulations and tie back into some way to the Ten Commandments, and that influence has continued on to various degrees all this time, which have been thousands of years.
Alyssa, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, we're doing a podcast dedicated to an ancient book.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it definitely has affected our lives. I don't know.
We just don't think about it that often.
Yeah.
There are lots of traditions, even things like weddings, how we do weddings, and the ceremonial portion of weddings, and funerals, the ceremonial portion of funerals, and they get passed down through ancient times, that they don't deviate that much, and it's not a large amount of deviation. I just don't think we realize it. So verse 8 says, Solomon's living quarters surrounded a courtyard behind this hall, and they were constructed the same way. He also built a similar living quarters for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had married. So, Alyssa, you referred to as 1,000 wivubines, concubines and wives. She gets a house as big as his. Am I misreading that? Her living quarters are similar to his living quarters. Is that what it says?
I think at least it mirrors probably in appearance and location, if not in size and and degree.
We would have talked about the marriage covenant or pact that he makes with Pharaoh in a different podcast. This is where it shows up. What do you think was special about Pharaoh's daughter? Why do you think she, out of 1,000, gets this special treatment? Do you think it was a love relationship? Was it an obligation that he had made with the king of Pharaoh to treat the Pharaoh of Egypt to treat his daughter this way? Was this part of the peace treaty? I don't know. I'm just curious. When you read something like that, what kinds of things do you think about in your mind?
It seems like it's like, I'm treating your daughter well. Look over here. I mean, because if he hadn't treated Pharaoh's daughter well, then that would in some ways negate the treaty and the peace that it was meant to bring.
Yeah, I think the political aspect obviously comes into play, but I think there's more there. I think he does have significant feelings, appreciation, and value for her to go to the effort, because he could have furnished her super nice, elaborate quarters to live in, but not to the degree which he did. Even the positioning of near the garden, and the list goes on. It seems like he was very overt about going out of his way to providing her with something very special.
Yeah, so the things I automatically think of, you mentioned that fourth sister wife. Like everything, I wonder what the other 999 thought, or ever how many there are. How did she get she got the room right next to him, or why don't we get it? The jealousy creeps in. When I read things like this, and what I'm saying is extra biblical. I get that, so I'm not trying to lay out doctrine or theology, but it's just like reading any other story. If I read a novel or a book, I try to think about all the other things that were happening around that would cause this response, and I'm wondering what everybody else is thinking. Is she the one that he sleeps with every night? Is this his
They have
favorite?
different houses. I don't think they're necessarily sleeping together.
Well, why is she esteemed? Why is she treated this way? Is that fair? Because jealousy is a horrible, horrible thing. So verses 9 through 12 tell us, it says, from foundation to eaves, all these buildings were built of huge blocks of high quality stone, cut with saws and trimmed to exact measure on all sides. That's why it took 13 years. One, it was exact. Two, they weren't using a stone saw.
Yeah.
They were two hands on it. Gracious. Some of the huge foundation stones were 15 feet long. Some were 12 feet long. I just want to stop and say, I have seen, I get these two confused. So it's the Parthenon, right? The Parthenon is in Rome. The Pantheon is something different, right? The Parthenon. Am I right?
I'd have to verify.
I'd have to look. So either way, whichever one you maybe you'll know what it's this circular building, and there's the roof is made of one piece of solid stone with a hole in the middle. I'm pretty sure it's marble, but it's a huge building. When I say huge, it's got to be 150 feet across. So one piece of stone, I think about when I look at this kind of thing. Today we have marvels of engineering with machinery that can pick things up and move it. They didn't. To think that they could move a 15-foot long stone into place is just incredible to me. It says the blocks of high quality stone used in the walls were also cut to measure in the cedar beams. The walls of the great courtyard were built so that There was one layer of cedar beams between every 3 layers of finished stone, just like the walls of the inner courtyard of the Lord's temple with its entry room. And you could read on about the gold and, gosh, all the things that are there. Literally, if you built a building out of high quality stone and cedar today, it would cost you billions of dollars. Not millions, but billions of dollars. When I read this, I think extravagance, and I just speak for my own life. I don't consider myself to be wealthy, but compared to the majority of the world, I would be considered wealthy. And I find myself attention, what's too much? How much is too much? Is there a limit? What could the money be better used for? How many poor people could have been fed in his kingdom if he had just built it with a little bit less great materials? So there are always conversations. There's conversations in the world today about wealth being concentrated. Do people have too much money? Is there as we're recording this, there's the wealthiest man in the world, I guess he that's what he qualifies for now, has made some big social media purchase, and set the world on fire, and everybody's all in an uproar about why one single man could spend $50 billion. Those are numbers that I don't even think about. Is there, even where the church is concerned, is there a place where we reach a ceiling of excellence and it becomes extravagance and it becomes heaped upon ourselves, and the work of God is no longer, it's not that it's not done, but the increase from it levels out, and all we're doing is building our own kingdom after that? I'm just curious.
I think it's really hard to see it when you're in it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he necessarily would have thought, he would have thought this was great, but I don't think he was thinking this is too extravagant. It's hard to view kind of the rest of the world when you have such great wealth. I don't know, it's hard to have a fair view of the world, or a good understanding of what other people have to go through when you're not struggling with that, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and even with what we perceive to be extravagance because of the time and materials and consideration, but in comparison to his overall wealth, this probably was a small portion representing what his wealth was. And as we read on and to see that the nation of Israel was blessed, the people had what they needed, they were happy. We have insights to times when he made these elaborate sacrifices. So I don't get the indication that he was selfish or greedy from that perspective, that he wasn't willing to help or to serve other people. But to answer your question about can it be too much, I think the answer is yes. As Alyssa said, identifying that or knowing when it happens, when you cross that line, I'm not sure is so easy to understand. People from the outside looking in, I think, can draw that distinction a lot quicker, or at least their perception, before we can.
So I would agree with that. I think I heard somebody say it this way, like we know what, I don't know if the word is abuse, over extravagant, things look like. It's easy to spot, but it's not always easy to see when you cross that line. Mm-hmm. At what point did you cross that line? Because you didn't go to sleep. In the world we live in, there are people who go to sleep one day without lots of money, and in short periods of time later, they have lots of money if they have some, unicorn in Silicon Valley, where they've gotten wealthy. But for the most part, it's a progressive thing. Even with churches, they grow and they grow and they grow. And I've been in buildings where, like, I'll give you an example right now. So that I question the big thing with mega churches now, because they have these big, almost arena field theater rooms that aren't conducive to funerals, weddings, just about anything. Many of them are going on pieces of their property and building these elaborate chapels, is what they call them. And the chapels that they're building, like I've seen a couple of them, would cost more than what it costs to build this building. You know, millions of dollars. It's not like it's, I mean, and they only use it for weddings and funerals. Like, so the question then I begin to ask is that a good use of God's money? Is God glorified with that? You know, when you were spending millions of dollars on nothing but to have weddings and funerals end, you know, and they're incredible. So those are questions that I ask, you know, is there a place? I think from the outside, you're right. We can identify, that's too much, you know, but when we're in it, it sure would be nice to have. I can think of a few things right now that would be on my wish list.
I can think of a few things that you've said on your wish list recently.
Yeah, they would be on my wish list. But I ask myself, is that good kingdom use or not? You know, I don't know. And it's a real tension point. I would say, as long as it's a tension point, I'm probably not in a bad place.
I agree.
But the minute that it's like, whatever, you know, spend $100,000, who cares? Then that's a different.
Probably in trouble.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All right, let's close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for details in your word that may cause us to pause and ask a couple of questions that we might not have asked before. I pray, God, that you would help us to do things with excellence that bring glory and honor your name, but help us not to fall over into extravagance where we may abuse and dishonor the things that you have blessed and given to us. May we be faithful in our personal finances, our church finances. May we be aware of the things that will bring honor and glory to you, and help us to do those things with a right heart. In Jesus' name.